I would end every staff meeting asking people if they had questions. And of course, they never did. And I took that as a good sign. My communication must have been clear. Message received, huh? But looking back, I know people had something to say. They just didn't want to deal with the trouble that came along if they actually spoke up. And I was the reason. Let's go for a walk. See, I was in my mid-20s when I started my first job as a manager. And I got something wrong that a lot of people get wrong when they first start as a boss. That you need to prove yourself. And proving yourself is proving how smart you are and how much you actually know. And see, I was promoted to that role because I did the job really good before. But that actually hurt me in the beginning, and I had to learn some hard lessons, and luckily I learned them. And I want to talk about that today because I think there's a risk of people not actually learning those lessons and staying the kind of boss that I was early on their entire careers. As a young guy in a new role, I felt like I had to prove myself. And proving myself was showing how much information I knew. But the reality was I didn't know all the things. And that all stemmed from actual insecurity. You see, I didn't know what that actually meant to lead people. I thought it was the boss was supposed to be smarter. I was in this position. I was a young guy. The people that I was working with could have been my parents, some of them. And rather than looking at that like, wow, there's a treasure trove of information and wisdom there, I was insecure and I tried to be smarter than everybody else. I could only demonstrate my credibility through my supposed expertise. And then some buzz phrases like be a team player and, choose your attitude, things like that. Thinking back at how I used to lead is really cringeworthy, and I'm not proud of it. But it's all about having to learn these things. And I want you to learn these things because if you don't, you might continue to rise in your career. You might be outwardly successful, but you're being rewarded for the wrong things. You see, from the outside, I was getting good results. I received positive feedback, like I was running a tight ship. People would make comments all the time. You're really making a name for yourself. And of course, as someone who didn't know any better, that affirmed how I was doing things. So the behavior that was contributing to no questions by any of my staff and people just being obedient, I was being rewarded for that. So much so that I was actually approached for a promotion and asked to take over another department and do the same thing there. And while I was going through the process of changing roles, one of the physicians that I worked with, he and I were talking, and I don't remember what the meeting was even about, but I remember one thing he said that really stood out, and it has impacted my entire career, and I have him to thank for a lot of it. He said, Michael, the people who are doing the work every day, they probably know the job better than you ever will. And that kind of stopped me, thankfully, because what I could have done is been like, yeah, of course they do, but I know better. But luckily that got my attention. Now I had spent the last couple years pretending that I'm the subject matter expert on everything, when there were people that had been doing the job for as long as I'd been alive at the time. And yet I thought because I was the manager, some young hotshot, that I knew how to do all the things better than anyone else would, that I had all the answers, that it was my job to have all the answers. Now that physician knew exactly what he was trying to say. And luckily, I heard it, and it changed the way I looked at myself as a boss from that time forward. You see, in this new role, I couldn't be a subject matter expert. I'd never worked in this type of area before. And so the people who were doing the work knew things that I didn't know. So I had to go into this very differently. I couldn't use my expertise to gain credibility. And what I found was people were actually more open to what I had to say and seemed to respect me a lot more when I actually was curious about what they had to say. And they didn't look at me like I was dumb, like I didn't know what I was talking about, like I didn't deserve to be their boss. What I found is they actually started to treat me with more respect. And they actually asked me what I thought, and they wanted my opinion, even though I had no expertise in their areas. It's almost like because I appreciated what they knew first, they appreciated what I knew next. And then came my motorcycle accident, that put me out of work for over 3 months. And during that time, I was in no position to be leading anything or making any decisions. And my team, they told me when I would reach out, they're like, you don't worry about this place. We got it covered. With a traumatic brain injury, I wasn't even capable. They didn't think I'd ever return to work. That's another story. So when I returned back to work after not being there for over 90 days, I get back to find that staff had altered the patient schedules. They had changed the doctor's block time in surgery. They had moved around their own work schedules. They actually filled a position that was open, all to increase our patient capacity, our throughput, to meet the physician's expectations. All these things. They moved around each other's schedules to make sure that everyone got the time off they needed. The place ran like a top. And when I got back, they said, yeah, we made all these changes, and if you don't like it, we can revert it back, but it really has helped with these things. But I think that they knew that if they made those changes, no matter what happened, if they were doing it for the right reasons, then I'd support them. I was really, really happy to come back to a team that actually kept going and improved things when I was gone. I don't think that would have happened with the other team, but not because those people weren't vested and didn't want to do a good job. They didn't trust me. They didn't want to deal with that trouble. And so they didn't push against anything. They didn't take risks. They didn't want to change anything on their own because they didn't want to deal with the trouble of whatever I would say when I got back. You can say the obligatory, does anybody have any questions? Or something goes wrong and you find out that people knew the whole time that something just wasn't going right, but they didn't tell you ahead of time. They didn't proactively come to you to identify the problem. The lesson I learned early on is asking people for feedback doesn't mean much if they've learned what happens if they actually give that feedback. So the question for me wasn't, why doesn't my team speak up? It was, what have people learned happens when they do speak up?